I want to begin by expressing my gratitude and that of my colleagues in the program Judaic Studies for the sponsorship and hosting of this panel by the Watson Institute. Over the many years that I've been on the faculty at Brown, I've organized a number of conferences, panels, speakers to bring together the voices of both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think one can argue that this academic year, the need for such dialogue is greater than ever. So I'm delighted that we have our guests, Gershon Baskin and Sinijlawi, who have agreed to participate in this panel discussion, Israel and Palestine Beyond the Israel-Hamas War. Our plan was for both visitors to be in person today, but there was a delay in the processing of Samra's visa application to the U.S. State Department, and so he wasn't able to come at this time to the United States. I'm hoping that will get cleared up and we'll get to see him on another occasion in person, but I do appreciate his participation. Let me begin with a brief introduction of each of our guests. These brief introductions do not adequately portray their life's work and the impact they have had and continue to have on life in Israel and Palestine. Gershon Baskin was born and grew up in the United States, and he moved to Israel at the age of 22. Throughout his adult life, he has dedicated himself in many ways to a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He holds a doctoral degree from Greenwich University, and his official roles have included the founding of the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information, which is known as IPCRI, and his current position as the Middle East Director of the International Committee Organization, which is dedicated to supporting the path to a shared society in Israel and peaceful relations between Israel and Palestine. Sinijlawi is a Palestinian political activist born and currently living in East Jerusalem. He is the founding chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund, a public corporation aiming to facilitate the development of Jerusalem by encouraging and sponsoring mega projects in the city, such as housing projects, hotels, commercial centers, and educational institutions. He's also the chairman and major shareholder of Group Al-Fasit, a regional energy investment group with branches in Jerusalem, Amman, Abu Dhabi, and Madrid. Gershon and Samer have committed themselves to work together to have a positive impact on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in conversation with Palestinians and Israelis who are political leaders and decision makers on both sides of the conflict. As experts on the conflict, they testified yesterday at a hearing of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the British Parliament, which is exploring the future of British foreign policy in relationship to Palestine and Israel. In this first part of the event, I will ask Gershon and Samer about their work and that they do as political activists, as well as their perspectives on this current stage of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that began on October 7th. Following the conversation, there will be ample opportunity for those of you in the audience to ask questions. Okay, so I'm going to begin first by asking you both to tell us on a personal basis what your personal experiences have been living with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict during your lifetime. What impact has the conflict had on you at various stages of your life? And how in the course of your life has your perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict changed? You want to begin, Gershon?
Sure.
Okay.
Is it okay if I take a mic and stand up? Is that all right?
Sure. I think it's on, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon or evening. I don't know what hour we're at here, to everyone, and thank you for coming. David, in answering your question, I have invested the last 45 years of my life dedicated exclusively to building bridges between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel and Israelis and Palestinians. I moved to Israel, as you said, when I was 22 years old. And I actually immigrated and lived in a Palestinian village in Israel for 2 years doing community work. It was a program called Interns for Peace, and I learned 1,000,000 times more than I contributed. making a lot of mistakes along the way. But one of the things that I discovered, and one of my motivations for going and living with Palestinian citizens of Israel, was simply to gain credibility in the eyes of Israelis who, until that time, whenever I spoke politically, would push me away, say, naive, stupid American, you don't know anything. The sentence that I used to hear from Israelis more than any other sentence was, you don't know them. Them, of course, being the Arabs, the Palestinians. And after a very short period of time of living in a Palestinian village for a few months, I realized that I knew them much better than most Israeli Jews who I knew and encountered. I went on from doing that work to proposing to the government of Israel. The prime minister at the time was Menachem Begin, when I discovered that there was not a single civil servant in the entire Israeli government working on the question of relations between the Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel. I proposed to Menachem Begin that they create a position, and I became the first civil servant in Israel working on Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. I went on to work in the Ministry of Education and created a department for the Education for Democracy and Coexistence. And with German government funding, supported by the Prime Minister's Office and the Ministry of Education, I founded the Institute for Education for Jewish-Arab Coexistence, which I directed for 7 years until the breakout of the First Intifada. In the First Intifada, in March of 1988, in the 4th month of the First Intifada, after reading flyers that were being put out into the public space by the United Command of the Intifada, which represented the 4 main political bodies within the Palestine Liberation Organization, after reading their flyers and understanding what they were seeking, I went and spent a day in March of 1988 in the Dheisheh refugee camp south of Jerusalem, south of Bethlehem, not far from where I was living in Jerusalem at the time, and spent about 6 hours with 30 young Palestinians trying to understand from them what they were fighting for and what they believed in. I should have prefaced this by saying that when I was a student at New York University, New York in 1976, I went to meet with the PLO ambassador to the United Nations at the time, together with 2 friends who we proposed to this PLO representative that they recognize the state of Israel and support a 2-state solution. And Ambassador Terzi's response to me at the time was, over my dead body, you Jews should go back to where you came from, you have no right to steal our land. And I understood where he was coming from and what his position was, but I believed in my heart of hearts back in 1976 that a time would come in the not too distant future when Palestinians would face the reality of Israel's existence and try to find some way of accommodating their own needs for freedom and liberation and dignity with the existence of Israel. That happened in the outbreak of the Intifada. And when I read those flyers and went to talk to people in Dheisheh, a refugee camp, I then resigned as director of the Institute of Education for Jewish-Arab Coexistence and created a joint Israeli-Palestinian public policy think tank. We called it a do tank also, which I co-directed for 24 years with Palestinian colleagues. Our premise in creating this joint Israeli-Palestinian public policy think tank back in 1988 were 2 very radical ideas. One, that we were going to work together, Israelis and Palestinians, side by side in one office, one organization, with full equality between us. And the second premise was that the solution is the 2-state solution. And that's what we proposed as a means of working back in 1988. And our assumption was that we should not argue about the solution, we should work on trying to figure out how to get there, or do reverse engineering. And in 24 years of running this joint organization, we conducted more than 2,000 working groups of Israeli and Palestinian professionals on every aspect of life between Israelis and Palestinians, whether it be security and border management, economy, water, environment, health, archaeology, tourism, you name it, 2,000 working groups in 24 years. I'll end this part by also mentioning, through life's experiences and circumstances, in 2005, one of my wife's first cousins was abducted and murdered by Hamas. I was running a conference on the future of Jerusalem, which was taking place in Switzerland at the time, and my wife called me and told me that some of her cousins had called her and said that her cousin, Sasson, was missing. They know that he went home with one of his Palestinian workers to Ramallah after work and didn't come back. And they wanted me to see if I could use my contacts in Palestine to see if we could find what happened to Sasson. I called my partner in Jerusalem, Mr. Hannah Signoro, is a well-known Palestinian, and Hannah went to Ramallah, and he went to the security and asked around, and no one knew anything about Sasson. A few days later, Hamas published a videotape showing Sasson handcuffed. He had been tortured. Sasson is an Iraqi Jew and spoke fluent Arabic, and he said in Arabic that in exchange for his life, Israel had to release Palestinian prisoners. A few days later, they found Sasson's body on the side of the road in the West Bank. He had been butchered with a butcher's knife, murdered. At his funeral in Jerusalem, attended by more than 1,000 people, almost no one who knew Sasson, I stood over his grave and cried with everyone. He had been in my car 3 weeks before. We had came home from a family function in Netanya to Jerusalem. He lived in Jerusalem. He was at my wedding. One of my wife's first cousins. She had a big family, but one of her first cousins, her age. And I looked over his Sasson's grave and swore to myself that if ever again anyone ever approached me to save a human life, I would do everything humanly possible to do that. Cutting shortly ahead, a few months later, I was at a conference, Mediterranean Development Conference, sponsored by the World Bank in Cairo, and I was the only Israeli there. And a friend of mine from Gaza, a professor of economics at the Fatah University in Gaza, Al-Azhar University, approached me and said, Gershon, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. He was a student of mine in the past. He's a professor of economics at the Islamic University in Gaza and a member of Hamas. And he came from Gaza to Cairo because he heard there might be an Israeli here. He had never spoken to an Israeli, never spoken to a Jew before. I'd been working with Palestinians for more than 20 years. I'd actually never sat down with anyone from Hamas. So Professor Mohammed Migdad and I spent about 6 hours the next 2 days in dialogue. It reminded me very much of my conversation that I had with the PLO ambassador back in 1976. We agreed on almost nothing. But I proposed to Professor Migdad that we continue to talk, and we created a dialogue group. I would bring together a group of Israeli academics. He would bring other Hamas academics from Gaza. I promised him that I would find a country that would sponsor us. I found 4 countries that would sponsor us. And to make a long story short, it didn't happen because the Hamas leadership vetoed it. But in the interim, I invited Professor Migdad to attend an Israeli-Palestinian meeting that we organized in Istanbul. I don't even remember what the subject was, but it was the first time that he was there. On June 25th, 2006, early in the morning, there was a cross-border raid coming up through a tunnel to an Israeli army base at Kerem Shalom in the south of the Gaza Strip. The 8 Palestinian fighters, commandos, terrorists, pick your own words to describe them, shot a rocket-propelled grenade at a tank which went aflame. 2 soldiers got out of the tank and they were shot and killed on the spot. One of the Palestinian fighters climbed up on the tank and dropped a hand grenade inside, which exploded. They pulled out another soldier, Gilad Shalit, and he was dragged off into Gaza. It took more than an hour before the army knew that they were missing a soldier, and when they did, the Israeli army started a military operation in Gaza called Summer Rains, where they started bombing Gaza, mainly to cut off exit points to Egypt. 6 days later, Professor Migdad called me and said, Gershon, we have to do something. I said to him, what can we do? He said, let's try to open up a channel of communication between Hamas and Israel. He went in his car to the Prime Minister's office, the Hamas Prime Minister's office. They called me. Later that afternoon, I organized a telephone conversation between Noam Shalit, Gilad's father, and one of the Hamas leaders who's actually become very famous in this war, Ghazi Hamad. I don't know if you've seen him. He was the person interviewed on the Lebanese news channel in which October 7th he said we would do it over and over and over again. I met the Shalit family the next day. They came to Jerusalem, and I told them I would be with them until Gilad Shalit comes home. 5 years and 4 months later, Gilad Shalit came home, and a deal negotiated between Israel and Hamas for the release of 1,027 Palestinian prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza. I ran a secret direct channel between Israel and Hamas. From that day, a week after Gilad Shalit was abducted, the secret back channel became official in May of 2011. and it led to the release of Gilad Shalit and 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. I've been negotiating with Hamas for 17 years. I am, I think, without a doubt, the Israeli who has spent more time talking to Hamas than any other Israeli alive who's not in the Israeli prison service. I know a lot about Hamas. I know a lot about how they think. I am interviewed every day in media locally and internationally, and the one thing that I will tell you is that everyone speaks on behalf of Hamas and tells everyone what Yahya Sinwar wants and what Ismail Haniyeh wants and what all these other people want. And the truth is that no one knows. We all guess. We all assess. But we really don't know what they're thinking and what they're demanding. We know that there are negotiations going on for a ceasefire now, very difficult, and we'll get more into that afterwards.
Thank you, Samer. Samer.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. I really missed the opportunity to be physically with you in the room, but hopefully there will be lots of other opportunities. I'll introduce myself. I am Samer Sinijlawi, Palestinian from East Jerusalem. I started my political life at the age of 15. I was one of the Intifada kids who were throwing stones in 87, 88. And I went to the Israeli jail. I spent 5 years there. That's where I learned my Hebrew language. I speak very good Hebrew. And that's where I started my first encounters and discussions with the Israelis, with my guards. But when I left the prison in 93, it was Oslo Agreement, a totally different page in the history of Palestinians and Israelis. And by the way, I would like to mention to you that nobody recruited me to be a kid throwing stones at the Israelis in 87. Before that date, I was a normal kid in Jerusalem. I didn't realize that Jerusalem has two identities, one Israeli or one Palestinian. I thought that whatever I see in the city is part of my own identity. Seeing a Haredi Jews or seeing an Israeli soldier, it was common scene in my city. I am a Palestinian Muslim who went to a Christian school in the old city. So it's a very diverse city. You can see lots of religions, lots of national identities. And I was having piano lessons. I was going each weekend to a swimming pool in a hotel in the city. So it was a very, very normal life for any kid. But when the first Intifada erupted, and I started watching TV every day and see kids throwing stones and Israeli tanks, it occupied me. It penetrated me. Suddenly, I started realizing that there are two stories in the city. There is us and there is them. And I found myself automatically in the street throwing stones. When I was released from the prison, I was elected as the international secretary for the Fatah Youth. And the Fatah is the main political party that was at that time headed by Yasser Arafat, and now it's headed by Mahmoud Abbas. And because it was peace, we started our dialogue with the labor youth. At that time, the Labor Party was the main Israeli Labor Party, headed and led by the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. And in 96, after the elections, we started talking to the Likud, and I continued my whole life talking to the Israelis. To the extent, I think sometimes that maybe I know the Israelis more than they know themselves, because I talk to every Israeli possible, left, center, right, and sometimes the Israelis don't talk to each other. But it was a very good investment, 35 years of engagement with Israelis. I think for me it was a very good investment, and it helped me now understand better this conflict and understand better how we can find an exit of this madness that we are living. Both peoples, the Palestinians and Israelis, they share the same ethos. We believe we have a good cause, a just cause. Because we have a just cause, we have a just fight, and thus both of us believe we will win. But what we don't realize, that if we look deeper into this conflict, we will discover that we have never been the problem of each other. Maybe we are more the solution to each other. But we need to start looking into the conflict into slightly different. If we look at the narrative, the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative, we will discover that with slight modification of both fighting narratives, we can come into one combined narrative that will easy things for us to find a way of coexistence. For me as a Palestinian, if I start looking at the history and I say, well, this is a fact. There is historical rights for Jews in this land. They have been here thousands of years, and they are still here, and they will continue to be here. So I cannot deny this historical links of the Jewish people to Israel and Palestine, the whole land, from the river to the sea. And at the same time, if the Israelis start looking at this history and they say, well, yes, we have historical rights in this land, but we have never been alone. There was always others, and these others are the Palestinians. And if we have this common history together, there is no way we shouldn't be able to find a common future together. What's preventing us to start thinking in this way is that we are totally ignorant of each other. We don't know each other. I have met recently very important ministers in this current government. 3 months ago, one of them, in his office in the Knesset. And I discovered that I was the first Palestinian he have ever met in his life. Well, he could have found some occasions where he could meet a taxi driver, a Palestinian taxi driver, or a grocery employee, but never a Palestinian politician into a political debate. And he is a minister, and he is a member of the cabinet. So this ignorance does not allow us to start thinking differently in this conflict. To the extent that this conflict has brought us to a situation in the 7th of October and every day in the war on Gaza, that our victims don't have names, that our victims are not able to be buried. So we have thought, both sides, that everything is permissible for us in this conflict, that we can always put whatever we are doing in a moral package and convince ourselves that we are doing the right thing because we have a right cause. while we should have been looking into things in a different way. We should have been trying to put moral red lines in this conflict. If we are not able to solve it now, maybe we should be able to put some moral red lines that we prevent ourselves from crossing these moral red lines. Because by the end of the day, before being Israelis or Palestinians, we are human beings. And I don't think that any human being can accept what has been done on the 7th of October. What has been done on the 7th of October is the moral, ethical, political, and religious and legal responsibility of us as Palestinians. Even those who are moderate like me, liberal like me, that don't believe in violence as a way to achieve political targets, but it has happened on our names and it is on our soldiers. That's why I went there to a small kibbutz called Kfar Azza in the envelope of Gaza. And I gave condolences and I condemned what has happened there. While 1 kilometer away from me, I was hearing the bombs falling on Gaza, killing a Palestinian child every 6 minutes. But at that moment, I didn't want to look at Gaza. I wanted to look at Kfar Azza and have a moral position into what has happened on that day. And I hope one day, one Israeli will go to the city of Gaza and also raise some moral questions about what's happening there. Whether it is justified to kill 16,000 kids in defending the borders. For me, I don't see any reason that can justify killing a kid in an Israeli kid in Kfar Gaza on the 7th of October, even if there was an occupation that went for years. And I think also nothing should justify killing any kid in Gaza, even if there was the horrible attack of the 7th of October. Whatever has happened on the 7th of October is our responsibility. Whatever is happening inside Gaza now is the responsibility of the Israelis. And one day they should, I leave it to them. I'm not here to try to push this debate inside the Israeli street. I have pushed a debate inside the Palestinian street for my own interest, for our own sake. And I leave the other debate for the Israelis to pick it up one day. The situation on 7th of October has proven again that this conflict can never be managed, that this conflict cannot continue more, that there is a responsibility to end this conflict. And since I am talking to an American crowd here, I would like to tell you that in spite of all the bloodshed that has been happening since the beginning of the conflict, and in particular on the 7th of October and later, I will never have hard feelings towards Israelis. It's very painful what's happening in Gaza. It's very painful, the images that are coming from Gaza each day. I cry every day when I see some images that are coming from there, but I will never have hard feelings towards Israelis for a simple reason. They are killing us and we have been killing them. But sometimes I really cannot understand why a great nation like the USA, a liberal nation that has brought a lot of values to humanity, leading the free world, cannot do something real to save these lives now. It's just standing and watching and letting things happening. I really cannot understanding, and I may have some hard feelings because the only rescue boat that we have, both Israelis and Palestinians, is the American. The American administration is the only address that is capable to put an end to this conflict, and they can do it if they have a political will, but they don't have a political will. I would like to stop here, and maybe we leave some space for questions and take the discussions into details that are more interesting to the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like us to turn now to what is so much on our minds, which is the question of how do you explain what happened on October 7th? And what each of your views is of what has happened since October 7th. What do these events say about the two peoples? And what does it also say about the leadership of these two peoples? What is being revealed about the current state of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a result of what's been going on over the last several months? Should I begin?
First of all, and David, there is nothing that justifies the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. We can explain what led up to it, what were the underlying causes of the events, but there's no excuse for the atrocities that they committed. With that being said, since at least 2009, the Israeli government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been prime minister for most of the time since 2009, has succeeded in implementing a strategy that aimed at removing the Palestinian-Israeli conflict from the Israeli agenda and from the international agenda. And he was so successful at doing it that even in 5 rounds of elections that we recently had in Israel, the Palestinian issue was never even addressed. And in reality, the Palestinian question is the only existential question facing the state of Israel. The occupation of the Palestinian people by Israel determines whether or not Israel can fulfill its own definition as the democratic nation state of the Jewish people. With 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Israeli Jews living in the territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, Israel is not a democracy, nor is it a Jewish state. This is an existential issue. Israel cannot be the democratic nation state of the Jewish people while it occupies another people equal in size, and some say that they've crossed more than 50% of the population, that there is a Palestinian majority between the river and the sea, and Israel effectively controls that territory, and the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem do not enjoy equal rights whatsoever, and the Palestinian citizens of Israel, 20% of the citizens of Israel, do not enjoy equal rights. They are systemically discriminated against. This is the existential question that determines Israel's identity, and it wasn't even discussed in 5 rounds of elections. How did that happen? Netanyahu created a policy which left a weakened Hamas in power in Gaza and systematically delegitimized the Palestinian government of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank of Mahmoud Abbas. And he did that in order to say to the world, we want peace, but we have no partner. Who do you want us to negotiate with? Those in Gaza who want to destroy us? Or that corrupt regime in Ramallah that denies the Holocaust? And his policy was so effective that the Palestinian issue disappeared from the agenda. 30 years we've been talking about a 2-state solution. We say in Arabic, haki fadi. Empty words, meaningless. While 139 countries in the world recognize the existence of the state of Palestine, only one of the OECD powerful rich nations of the world do, that's Sweden. The United States, the United Kingdom, the countries of the European Union, Australia, Japan, Canada, have talked about a two-state solution, but only recognized one of them. While the occupation grew deeper and stronger, spreading wider, controlling the lives of the Palestinian people, October 7th changed all that. People talk about the conception or the conceptual framework of what existed before October 7 collapsing, and they're usually referring to the idea that we can pay Hamas money through the Qataris to keep them quiet. That's not the conceptual framework that broke down on October 7th. What broke down on October 7th is that we can occupy another people for 56 years and expect to have peace. Or that we can lock 2.2 million people in a territory like Gaza living in 80% poverty and expect to have quiet. That's what happened on October 7th. And as someone who supported the two-state solution my whole adult life, for as long as I remember, in the last years I thought it was no longer viable. And all of a sudden, the two-state solution is back in front of us. Israel can defeat Hamas militarily. It can destroy their infrastructure. It can destroy their military capabilities. It can destroy their ability to govern. Most of that has already been done with the total destruction of the Gaza Strip. There's just one part left to be finished before there's no place inhabitable in the Gaza Strip. But Israel cannot militarily defeat the idea and the ideology of Hamas. Never. The harder that Israel uses its military against Hamas, the stronger Hamas grows. The only way to defeat an ideology and an idea is with a better ideology and a better idea. And that better ideology and better idea is making Palestine real to Palestinians. Palestinians need to know that they can begin to live for Palestine and they don't need to die as martyrs for Palestine. What's required for that to begin to happen starts with what Samer said. It starts in Washington, with the United States finally coming out and recognizing the state of Palestine. And every nation of the 193 countries of the United Nations need to recognize the state of Palestine. They also need to recognize the state of Israel. Only about 160 of the 193 countries recognize the state of Israel. This is what needs to happen. That does not end the occupation. But it changes the parameters of the discussion, where a member state of the United Nations is occupying another member state of the negotiations, and the question of Palestinian statehood, the veto on Palestinian statehood, is removed from Israel. Israel has no right to decide on the question of Palestinian statehood. This is a question which should be taken away from Israel. It needs to be decided by the international community's recognition of the state of Palestine and the entry of the state of Palestine into the United Nations. This conflict used to be one that the international community said the Israelis and the Palestinians have to want it more than us. That is no longer true. This conflict has spread beyond the borders of Israel-Palestine. It endangers the entire region. It endangers international shipping. It endangers global security, and it can no longer be left to the Israelis and the Palestinians to decide by themselves. There is also no possible bilateral negotiating table where a successful negotiation can end because there is no symmetry in this conflict. And it cannot be a table which is led by the United States because the United States has been the absolute worst mediator in this conflict. They are not impartial. They serve as Attorney General for the State of Israel in negotiations, and that cannot be successful. We need to look forward to create a regional architecture for stability, security, economic development, dealing with climate change and energy and water and all the other issues, and it needs to involve Israel and Palestine and Jordan and Egypt and the Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco, and the Saudis have to be there. This is the framework in which negotiations needs to take place in the future. The United States and the European Union should be there to help and assist and provide guarantees in finance. but we need to reach there, and it begins with the recognition of the state of Palestine. One last word, and maybe we'll do this more deeply in the second round. How do we get there while this war is waging in Gaza? This war needs to end. There must be a ceasefire. There is no ending to this war if the Israeli hostages are not freed. There are 134 Israelis being held by Hamas in Gaza. It's estimated that more than 50 of them are already dead. Every day that they're in Gaza is a risk to their lives. There needs to be a negotiated end to the hostage crisis. It is going to cost Israel. Israel is going to have to release a large number of Palestinian prisoners. Since the war began, Israel has arrested more than 7,500 Palestinians in the West Bank. It has taken out of Gaza more than 1,000 Palestinians from Gaza, not all of them Hamas fighters. There are 559 Palestinians serving life sentences in Israeli prisons for murdering Israelis. Many of them, if not all of them, may have to be released to bring these hostages home. There is no end to the war without the hostages home. There is no Israeli victory without bringing the hostages home. There's also no end to the war if Hamas remains in power in Gaza. And there is no happy end for Israel if Israel reoccupies Gaza and stays there. I guarantee you that the longer Israel stays in Gaza, the more there will be armed insurgency against Israeli soldiers, and our soldiers will be coming back in body bags. There is no recipe of Israel providing security for Israel within the Gaza Strip. That doesn't exist. Samer will talk about some of the day after scenarios and how Palestinians see it. What is very clear is that if there had been a dozen tanks and 3 Apache helicopters on the Gaza border on October 7th, what happened on October 7th would have never happened. Israel's failure to protect itself and protect its citizens created something that Hamas could not have expected: the ease at which they breached the border, and 3,000 Palestinians crossed into Israel that day and committed those atrocities. And Israel does not need to occupy Gaza to prevent that from happening. Israel can do that from Israel's border. But the Palestinian people deserve a better regime than Hamas, and Hamas crossed a red line between humanity and what's on the other side on October 7th and made themselves no longer worthy of leading the Palestinian people. And that's not my words. Those are the words of many, many Palestinian people I know. They need to choose their leaders. They need to decide who should lead them and who has the legitimate right to lead them forward. And we'll leave that for Samer to pick up on.
Samer, please.
Well, yes, the issue of the hostages is very important. Unfortunately, in addition to the 134 Israeli hostages that are kidnapped in the bunkers of Hamas in Gaza, we have 7 million Palestinian hostages that are kidnapped in the bunker of our leader, President Mahmoud Abbas, who came to power 19 years ago in an election that is supposed to give him a mandate for 4 years, but he continued to employ himself until today. He's 89 years old, and I know that most of the Americans are now sensitive on the age of the president. Well, your candidates in the coming elections are at least 10 or 15 years younger than our president. And also, I believe that 10 million Israelis are also hostages in the bunkers of Netanyahu since 2009. And this war, I doubt there is an end to this war if both Palestinians and Israelis were not released from their current leadership. President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu are also obstacles into finding an exit out of this madness. I wrote an op-ed in New York Times in 21st of December under the title Mahmoud Abbas Must Go, and I explained how this leadership has disappointed the Palestinian people. One of them is myself. When I was young, 30 years ago, and I went to meet President Abbas, he was the deputy of President Arafat at that time, and I explained I am from Fatah. We used to meet him, a group of young leaders. He always ended his meeting with us saying that you are the leaders of tomorrow. I was in the 20s. Now I am in the 50s, and this tomorrow never came. So we have issues, real issues of leadership on the Palestinian side. And it is the lack of leadership. In the last century, we have not been able to succeed in improving the life and the opportunity for Palestinians because we have never had leadership. While if we compare ourselves to the Israelis, they have been lucky enough to have moderate, smart, pragmatic leaderships, always that knew what could be achieved in a certain time and grab it and do it. Both of us and the Israelis, we were groups of militias fighting the British mandate 100 years ago. Now Israel is an OECD country and we are still militias. The difference is leadership. And I think we will continue to be in this madness, in this conflict, unless we get rid of both leaders. So it's not only Palestinians and Israelis and the international community should refuse that Hamas continues to be a regime in Gaza. They should also refuse that Abbas continues to be ruling the West Bank. They should refuse also that Netanyahu continues ruling Israelis. And I think the Israelis will find a way to deal with this situation, because the Israeli society is a very energetic society, very active society. And they have proven in 2023 that they are able and capable to be hundreds of thousands every weekend in the streets protesting against a common threat to their society. And they can do it now. Now the Israelis are realizing again that they cannot postpone this until the end of the war, because Netanyahu will prevent ending the war. What's helping now Hamas to continue having the hostages in their hands is Netanyahu. I'm not sure that Netanyahu is really negotiating a deal with Hamas. He's pretending to do negotiations because he doesn't want to end this war. If he ends this war, then his political career and life will end with it. He knows this because the Israelis will not allow a prime minister to continue governing when the 7th of October has happened under his watch. He needs to be responsible in front of the Israelis about what has happened on the 7th of October. So the challenge of leadership is a real issue that is facing us. And maybe I want to talk a little bit about the two-state solution and the one-state solution from a Palestinian point of view. I believe that most of the Palestinians are willing to accept the two-state solution if it is based on the borders of 67, and also at the same time they are willing to accept the one-state solution if it is based on equal rights. What Palestinians will not accept is continuing in the current situation of a two-floor state solution, where one side is on the noble floor and the other side is in the servant floor. This cannot continue. I am 52 years old, and until now, I am not a citizen of any state. Israel is not taking me as a citizen, is not guaranteeing me citizenship and rights, even though I was born in Jerusalem in 1972, after the annexation of Jerusalem, after Jerusalem has been declared the eternal united capital of Israel, but Israel is not recognizing me as a citizen. And Israel is not accepting that the Palestinian will have a Palestinian state where I can have citizenship. And it's a basic need for any human being in the world to be at least a citizen in one state. So we can accept both options. And I know that there is no constituency now in Israel for neither of these options. But it's our obligation as Palestinians to try to create a support among Israelis to one of these options. If we start thinking in a different way, if we start believing that we don't need to work on defeating the Israelis, we need to work on defeating the fear inside the Israelis. If we start thinking that maybe we don't need to pressure the Israelis, not through the international community and not through using violence, maybe it's better for us to try to persuade the Israelis into taking a diplomatic path towards ending this conflict. I lost hope that the international community, including the USA, will be of benefit to us or to the Israelis in solving this conflict. The USA will do nothing. They have done nothing in the last 60 years, and they will continue to do nothing. They speak something, and they do something else. There is some kind of hypocrisy there. For me, as a Palestinian, I don't want to waste more energy into trying to work with the international community. I think it's better for us as Palestinians to work directly with the Israelis. Why do I need to travel 10,000 kilometers to Washington, D.C. to convince somebody in the White House to pressure the Israelis accepting the two-state solution? And I have the Israelis themselves 10 kilometers away. Maybe it's better for me if I will be one day the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Palestine. I will close 120 embassies out of 140 embassies that we have now and open a liaison office in each neighborhood in Israel. If I will be able to touch the hearts and the minds of the Israelis, maybe I will find a way for a solution. So leadership on both sides is very important. We need to have a Palestinian leadership that believes the best strategy for Palestinians should be based on providing security to Israelis. And we should have an Israeli leadership that believes that the best Israeli strategy should be based on providing well-being and development and national aspirations for Palestinians. And it is enough if one side can create this leadership alone, it will impact the other side and bring a similar leadership that is willing to offer a hand and work together.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps it'd be a good time now. There's a lot more to talk about, but I'd like to hear questions in your minds as you have, you have to speak into the microphone, so it's particularly so that Samer can hear all the way in Jerusalem. Would also be an opportunity if there are students who would like to stay after this formal setting for a more informal conversation with Gershon and Samer. You'll be welcome to do so as well. But for now, questions. You can just stand up at the mic and ask. There's much more to talk about, obviously. It's only the beginning of the conversation.
Go for it, go for it. I see you want to ask a question, go for it. Doesn't matter.
No,
Take the microphone.
this is for everybody. The only thing about the students was we may have a group of students afterwards, but it's open to everybody now. Anybody who has any curiosity, so go ahead, go for it.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Bill Fan. I'm alumni of Brown. Yeah. And many years ago, there was an Israeli intellectual, Amos Arts. And he wrote a very tiny book entitled How to Persuade Fanatics. He developed a concept, and I think it's quite insightful. He say, the real root cause a conflict between Jews and Palestinians is a problem of real estate, in the sense of the land. so this he don't think it's really a problem of religion, culture, or race. It's a real estate problem. It seems quite a simplistic, answer, not solution to a complex problem. I would like your opinion on that.
Sure, is this on? What do I have to do?
I think it's on.
Hello? Maybe someone in the control room needs to turn it on? It's red here? No?
I use mine.
Okay. So, yeah, if it was a real estate question, it'd be easy, because real estate equals money, and you exchange money, and you figure out how to deal with the real estate problem. But for 100 years, Jews and Palestinians have been killing each other over a territorial expression of identity. It's not just about territory, it's also about identity. And we're talking about the same piece of real estate between the river and the sea. The land, Eretz Israel or Palestine, is the same piece of territory that each nation claims exclusive rights to. Each side claims that it takes their identity from this real estate, from the land, and that it gives its identity to the land. If you were to take the Israeli Declaration of Independence, drafted mostly by Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, and the Palestinian Declaration of Independence, drafted by the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish, you would see two parallel documents, paragraph by paragraph, justifying why each side claims the right to the real estate, to the territory. They're both very brilliant documents, and one is a mirror image of the other, but it's very clear in both of those documents that they are claiming the exclusivity of their rights over that territory. Interestingly, in the paragraph that they both use to justify international legitimation, the United Nations decision from the 29th of November 1947, UN Resolution 181, which is commonly called the Partition Resolution, Ben-Gurion only noted that the UN decided to partition Palestine and grant the Jewish people the land of Israel. Mahmoud Darwish, in the Palestinian Declaration of Independence, wrote that the UN decided to partition Palestine into two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state, and that's written in the Palestinian Declaration of Independence. It's not just about real estate. It's about recognizing the rights, the mutual rights of each other to be on this real estate, and to claim, both sides, to claim ownership of it. Even if we have a two-state solution with a clearly defined border between the state of Israel and the state of Palestine, for all Palestinians, all of Palestine is Palestine. It doesn't matter if the Palestinian state is located in the West Bank and Gaza with East Jerusalem as its capital. For them, Haifa, Ramle, Lud, and Akko will always be part of the Palestinian heritage. And for Jews, when we read the weekly portion in the Torah, the stories of our history, of our sacred book, don't take place on the beaches of Tel Aviv. They take place in the hilltops and valleys of Judea and Samaria. So for all Jews, all the land of Israel is the land of Israel, and for all Palestinians, all the land of Palestine is Palestine. Even if we have a two-state solution, we need to recognize that we're connected to what's on the other side of the border. That's why there are all kinds of solutions that could develop over time that talk about federation or confederation or movement across borders. That's why I always talk to Palestinian leaders of the necessity that they recognize that the future state of Palestine should have a Jewish minority. It's not only right, it's also good for their democracy. And former Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad once said to me when we had a conversation about this issue, he said, "We will treat our Jewish minority exactly as the Israelis treat their Palestinian minority." And I thought that was a really brilliant statement of how we could ensure that Palestinian and Israeli citizens would have really equal rights, because we would have an interest in Jewish citizens of the state of Palestine having equal rights. But it's much more complex than just real estate.
Did you want to respond, Samir?
Well, I agree with what Gershon has said. This conflict is not only a real estate conflict. It's a clash between identities, aspirations. I think also the international community has helped into keeping this conflict so long for lack of interference. The slogan of two-state solutions is meaningless if it does not come with action. Most of the Western part of the international community raises the two-state solution, but only recognizes one state. And I don't see why shouldn't, for example, the USA or the UK recognize the state of Palestine in addition to recognizing the state of Israel. If it is the issue of borders, well, Israel does not identify its borders now. And it will continue not identifying its borders. So recognizing the Palestinian state could be done without necessarily identifying the borders of the state of Palestine. And this is important because by the end of the day, everybody is witnessing that the settlement project is winning over the two-state solution. The settlement project represented by Ben Gvir and Smotrich is defeating the two-state solution. And maybe now we have only a very slight time window to rescue the two-state solution. If President Biden will not be able to take steps that will put Israelis and Palestinians into a real path that will lead shortly to the realization of the two-state solution, we should all say goodbye to that option. We have only short time.
Yeah, my question is sort of a follow-up to that. If the U.S. and other countries recognizing a Palestinian state is a necessary first step, why do you think that hasn't happened? And what would it take for that to become an issue that a president or politician would have to take a side on, either in the U.S. or in another country?
Well, I don't think it would have happened without this war that we're having today, where this conflict is endangering more than the security of the Israeli and the Palestinian people. And I don't think that there was a belief, or I know that there wasn't a belief in the international community that the Israeli and Palestinian people or their leaders were prepared to enter into a genuine peace process. We've seen failure after failure. The Israelis and the Palestinians signed 6 agreements during the Oslo peace process and then breached all of those 6 agreements. Both sides substantively breached the agreements that they signed, and American administration after American administration have failed every time they've attempted to do something constructive on the peace process, usually because they did it in the wrong way. But nonetheless, this is a death issue for American administrations. Now, we have a very interesting time clock right now because of the blind support of Israel in this war by President Biden and the Biden administration. President Biden is losing support within his own party. He's losing the young generation, losing minorities. And let's face it, those people who are saying that they are against the Biden policy on the Israeli war against Gaza are not going to vote for Donald Trump. They just won't vote. And if they don't vote, Joe Biden's not going to be president after November or after January of next year. This is a reality of the American election clock, maybe in some kind of coordination with the new policy that the United States of America needs to take on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And the first step has to be recognizing Palestine. The second step has to be telling the Israelis that they have to begin to think about how they're going to roll back the occupation. And this is the time for the Americans to do it. I have no guarantee that that would buy back support of young Americans and minorities in America who say they will not vote for Biden. But without doing it, there's no chance that they're going to vote for Biden. So I think that this is the first time of self-interest of the United States to actually change course and do it. Again, there's no guarantee that this will materialize into a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine. But I agree wholeheartedly with Samer that if the United States don't do it and grant the official birth certificate to the two-state solution, this administration will be the ones issuing the death certificate of the two-state solution. Let's face it, at the end of the day, there's a basic realization that we all need to make. Israelis and Palestinians need to understand, the United States and others. If security is really the concern of the United States, Israel's security is really the concern of the United States. Israel will never have security if Palestinians don't have freedom and dignity. Palestinians will never have freedom and dignity if Israel doesn't have security. This is the balance here that we are facing. And there is maybe the first time in the history of this conflict a chance for that to be implemented in an American policy decision. If the United States does it, the rest of the OECD countries will follow suit immediately. And that will change the parameters of future negotiations.
Samer, did you want to add anything?
Well, nobody can underestimate the military muscles that USA has in the Middle East. The big base in Doha, and another one in Bahrain, several in Iraq, several in Syria, several in Jordan, is a huge military power that is representing the USA on ground in the Middle East. Despite this fact, the USA has zero diplomatic influence over Israel. And why is this so? I have really no answer. There has never been a president, an American president, that has been so much generous to Israel, like President Biden has been on the 7th of October and until today, with all the diplomatic and international support that he is giving to Israel, all the military support that he is giving to Israel. But unfortunately, he has not been able even to allow a shipment of flour, American flour, that is coming as part of the humanitarian aid to Gaza, to enter to Gaza. Smotrich has blocked this shipment in the port of Haifa. Very small issue, very tiny issue. So Netanyahu once said in a private meeting, and it was recorded, and he didn't know that he has been recorded. He said that leave the Americans on me. It's very easy to manage the relations with the Americans. I know how to do it. I take everything from them and I give them nothing, and it will work. And it has been working like this, and it continued to be working now. I can understand why did President Biden support Israel on the 7th of October and in November and in December, but I cannot understand why is he still supporting the war now in January, February, and soon we will enter to March. Few months away from the election campaign, where he is willing to lose the elections and continue the support for a war that has no strategy. Until now, Prime Minister Netanyahu refuses to put the day after plan. And the day after plan is simply a political result of the war. No war ever has been launched without political aims, except now this war in Gaza that has no political targets. And that's why we are stuck into a situation where nobody really knows when and how this war will end. So I think it's time now for the USA to revise a little bit its strategy in the Middle East.
Please.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. You both mentioned the need for a new leadership in both Israel and Palestine. And given October 7th, the ensuing war, and how that's further radicalized both societies, I mean, surely we'll get a new name, but how do we get fundamentally different ideological leadership in place, especially given that Gaza has to be rebuilt and become an inhabitable place again?
I think it's a mistake to assess public opinion when we're still experiencing the deep trauma that we are. For Israel, more Jews were killed in one place at one time since the Holocaust. Without comparison, the Palestinians are experiencing the Nakba of 1948 all over again. Not just the Palestinians in Gaza, but every Palestinian everywhere in the world is experiencing the trauma of the Nakba. And current public opinion polls reflect that trauma. We're not capable, most people, of thinking rationally. We will be post-traumatic for a long time. It will take many, many years to overcome the trauma that we've experienced. We're all adding another very deep and sad, tragic chapter to our collective memories and narrative. But there will be a day of political reckoning. That day is coming quickly on the Israeli side. The first real break in the war, the first pause in the war, we will see massive demonstrations in Israel calling for the ousting of Netanyahu, calling for Netanyahu to be brought before a national commission of inquiry headed by a Supreme Court judge to answer for his responsibility that he refuses to accept on leading us here. Now, I can't give you any rosy picture of anyone in the Israeli political scene who I believe is the leader that I want to see. But I will remind us all that for 40 weeks before this war, we had hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the street, protesting the judicial upheaval that Netanyahu tried to push through. And we had the emergence of civil society leaders of the kind that we have never seen in Israel ever. And at least during the first 2 months of the war, I would claim even up until today, civil society in Israel replaced the government that was simply absent. The government was not there providing the people with its needs. And civil society was there. And that's where our leadership will rise up from. Maybe we'll have a period with Gantz or some other uninspiring leader who will win the elections, but that will not be for a long period of time. I know that people like Samer on the Palestinian side are going to rise to positions of leadership. I know that in the immediate period after the war, there will be a Palestinian who will have to be appointed by President Abbas, and then he will have to step aside into some kind of ceremonial role. But there will be a Palestinian who accepts the two-state solution, is ready to deal with Israel genuinely and confront the problems of Palestine. And that person will have legitimacy in the eyes of the Palestinian people before they go to elections. Eventually, they will need to go to elections. I hope that when they do, they will make a decision that political parties that support the armed struggle will not be allowed to participate in those elections, because in a Palestinian state with one sovereign, there can only be one gun. There can't be a multiplicity of militia. And I hope they make that decision. We know some of the people very well who might rise to positions of acceptable leadership in a temporary interim authority that would rule the West Bank and Gaza. They're there. There are those people there. I want to give one word of inspiration also with regard to our young generation, both in Israel and in Palestine. But it's so much more dramatic in Palestine because of the nature of Palestinian society. But almost more than 65% of university graduates in Palestine today are young women. And they're studying engineering and science and mathematics and computers. And they are struggling in a traditional patriarchal society culture to establish themselves as free, independent individuals. And they are emerging in Palestinian culture and society, and they will have an impact on Palestinian political culture. It may take a decade before it happens. I'll give you an example. In the Palestinian election law, they were supposed to hold elections in May of 2021. There were 36 political parties that registered to be elected. The Palestinians have within their election law that 25% of the candidates have to be women. We don't have anything like that in Israel. And look at our current Knesset government. We have fewer women in our government and in our Knesset now than we've had in the last decades. This is where hope is going to be for both Israelis and Palestinians as women play a more active role in our politics.
Well, I totally agree that it's not only a change of leadership that is needed. It's not only the revitalization of the authority, the PA. Maybe we need also to work into changing, deep changes in the society, both society. When I started my political activism, I was thinking that we are the white side of the conflict and the Israelis are the black side of the conflict. And later when I started talking to Israelis and knowing Israelis, I changed my opinion. And I start thinking that both of us are a combination of black and white. But today, after the 7th of October, after what we have done in the envelope of Gaza, and after what the Israelis are doing inside Gaza, I'm totally convinced that we are both black. There is nothing white in us. And we need to be able to prevent this moral collapse on both sides in this conflict. And this can be achieved by emerging leaders who can be sincere and honest with their people and say that we need to find another way. into handling this conflict. And because there is an urgency to solve this conflict very quickly, at least from the Palestinian side, I think we cannot accommodate a process of building trust and confidence bottom up. We need to do it the other side. We need to start creating confidence at the top of the pyramids and then going down, because we need a quick track, a very fast track. This conflict is causing us a lot of innocent lives. It's not only Palestinians that are losing lives. Okay, we are losing life at a large scale. 250 people are killed every day. But also Israelis are killed, an average of 2 Israelis a day during this war. From my own experience, because I have met all the Israelis, all the Israeli political elite now, everybody, almost everybody, I am sure that the coming Palestinian leadership will be able to work with anybody who will be replacing Netanyahu. Anybody. Left, center, or right. But with Netanyahu, nobody wants to trust him. I've heard something from a political analyst. He's very old, he's very famous, Amnon Abrahamstein. He participates in the panel of Channel 12. And he said that half of the Israelis, the left, they hate Netanyahu because they know he is a liar. And the other half, the right, they love Netanyahu because they know that he is a liar. And by the end of the day, we have a liar prime minister. It's not only the Israelis. Trust me, I've heard this in the Arab world. Even those who have signed the Abraham Accords. Nobody wants to talk to Netanyahu. Nobody wants to do business with Netanyahu. Even Biden knows he's a liar. Even Biden knows, after all the generosity that he has given him, that he will turn against him, like he has turned against Obama. So, hopefully, the younger generation of leadership on both sides will be able to assume power quick as possible. And then I can see a new dynamics in this conflict, a new horizons of opportunity.
Okay. Oh, the other right. Okay. Anything else? Yes. Go to the microphone, please. Yeah.
Thanks for coming to speak with us. So you mentioned that in a potential sovereign Palestinian state, it wouldn't be possible to have multiple militias. You need one sort of centralized military force. But do you think that the Israelis would be willing to, in a potential agreement, agree to an organized Palestinian defense force? And if not, what would a realistic compromise look like?
So in all Israeli-Palestinian negotiations until now, Palestinians have agreed to a non-militarized state. At one of the rounds of negotiations, I think it was in Annapolis, the Israelis and the Palestinians spent 6 hours discussing whether or not it's a demilitarized state or a non-militarized state. There are semantic values there to be gained, but to the best of my understanding, the Palestinians have not demanded in negotiations to have a real military force. Hamas did. Hamas created one, and we've seen what happened. Everyone recognizes that there needs to be a formidable police force in Palestine. The ability to combat terrorism and extremists needs to be there, but they don't need tanks and F-35 jets to do that. It will have to be a force controlled by the political elected leadership and not gangs and militia and tribal leaders, but and they will need to be trained and dedicated and well paid And these things are all manageable. I don't believe that Israel would agree to the Palestinians having an army. I often remember the words of the late Faisal Husseini, who was the most important Palestinian leader in Jerusalem, who, when he was released from prison and began negotiating with the Israelis, would often say it would be foolish for us to invest our limited resources in a Palestinian tank. Who are we going to use it against? We need to invest our limited resources in a Palestinian computer. That's where our future is. And I think he's totally correct. While sovereignty allows the ability of a country to have an army, to have a military, first of all, there are some countries that by constitution don't have one. Costa Rica is an example, who constitutionally don't have a military. I think it would be foolish for Palestinians to want to invest their limited resources in having a military because really, who are they going to use it against? They're not going to protect themselves against the Israelis if the Israelis want to invade them. There needs to be the political circumstances on the ground where there's no reason for Israel to invade them and no interest of Israel to invade them. By the same token, Israel needs to invest an enormous amount of resources to ensure that our neighbors are not poor and wanting. I could never understand the logic of wanting to have a poor neighbor. Israel has all the reason to work for Palestinian economic development and growth and the success of a Palestinian state, not the failure of a Palestinian state. So I don't think it's a real issue. We're going to need some kind of credible international military force that will involve Israelis and Palestinians along the Jordan River, perhaps on both sides of the Jordan River. We're going to need some kind of credible international force, perhaps with Israeli and Palestinian participation, along the Gaza-Egypt border. Israel has more than enough ability to defend the Gaza-Israel border if it's awake, unlike on October 7th. So I think that there are solutions to this issue, and in fact, there are solutions to every single issue in conflict.
Samer, any thoughts about how Palestinians want to deal with the issue of their own security?
Well, I guess if we are asking the whole world to recognize the Palestinian state, we should start by ourselves, recognizing our own Palestinian state. And in a state, there cannot be two arms. We cannot accept that if any individual has a gun or any group of people has some arms, they can declare war on Israel anytime they want. We should be able to control this. And I think it's for our own benefit. Maybe we should criminalize any use of violence against Israelis if it is not a state decision. Just like the Israelis. The Israelis, when they wanted to launch war against Gaza, was the army who was doing this. So we need, in a way or another, to control this issue, to convince the people that we are in a statehood phase and that we are able to act as a state. On the issue of demilitarizing the Palestinian state, well, it could be an option, really. But then nobody should blame us or put on our shoulders any responsibility in terms of security crisis. How can states control things and threats if they don't have some reasonable police or military power that can enforce law and act against any threat? So I guess at least now, if we are going to enter to Gaza and be responsible on the situation in Gaza, we should minimally, in a minimum way, possess a military power that is slightly stronger than that of Hamas or whatever will be left from Hamas. if we will be in a less military power to Hamas, they will do the same that they have done in 2007. And I would like to share with you something. General Dayton was appointed by the American administration in early 2000 to help build up a security coordination and system that works among Israelis and Palestinians. And when the Israelis decided to withdraw from Gaza, the military presence of the Israeli army in Gaza helped stabilize Gaza, in addition to the Palestinian security apparatus that was working there. When they withdraw this military power, there was a vacuum. And each time General Dayton came to meet Palestinian officials, including Mohammed Dahlan, who was in charge of the security in Gaza, he used to come with a lot of papers, plans. And then Dahlan told him, my friend, I don't read papers and I don't want to read the plans. Give me weapons, because if you don't give me weapons, who's going to replace the military power of the Israeli army that was there? How can I control Hamas? With your papers, I will not be able to control them. So we need to be smart and decide if really a demilitarized Palestinian state will help stabilizing the situation, then we are in and for it. But it needs to be the responsibility of everybody in case there will be failure. So we need to be smart into approaching this issue.
I want to thank Gershon and Samer for sharing your amazing wisdom, knowledge, and the spirit within which you demonstrate, that you, as in the way that you're working together in a way that we don't see enough of, and continue to wish you success in all your efforts. And again, if any students want to hang around a little bit longer, maybe come to the front and we can have a little more informal conversation. But I thank you all for attending. And again, thank you very much to Gershon and Sarah.